Hi, it's Beth again with another edition of Newscast because it has all been happening this week. So, we had this report into the funding of education on the Isle of Man. We'll hear from the current Education Minister Daphne Caine shortly, but first the former Education Minister Julie Edge also had plenty to say about it.
So obviously it was an independent report, so I've always been very vocal about this, about full transparency. We're in a government that wants transparency, so I did feel it should be published because the response and the policy direction beyond the publication of an independent report can still happen. You know, it doesn't mean to say you accept all of the recommendations or conclusions in an independent report. However, it was a focus of mine. I could show you reams of emails where I've communicated just trying to get the process going with Treasury, and then it becoming a Council of Ministers report, because the department itself couldn't do a funding review into itself and its schools, so it had to be a Council of Ministers report. Clearly, you know, it's been available for a long time, and certainly I was challenging constantly for education, particularly for our schools, having that experience in schools for the additional funds that are required, or tough decisions and fiscal responsibility would have to be forthcoming.
We've been told, though, that a lack of response from the department is the reason for the significant delay in the publication of this report. As you were minister for much of the time from when the report was available, presumably the finger of accusation is pointed to the time when you were in charge.
Completely dispute that, Phil. I think that's totally disingenuous if that has been said, and I would dispute that strongly. So
you did respond to the report?
Certainly not publicly. Clearly, you know, you are in a process, but I didn't respond publicly, no. However, I completely dispute those facts.
Okay, so in that case, presumably you did, as a department, issue some responses to the recommendations. Clearly, the headline-grabbing recommendation is closing 8 inefficient schools. Now, it's more about the system, I think, that's described as inefficient than necessarily each of the schools being inefficient. But were you willing to consider that recommendation?
Certainly from a school's point of view, I think we need to be looking at the whole school's infrastructure across the island, making sure that every student has got equal opportunity across the island and the best opportunities to progress in life. And certainly, you know, some of the areas picked up in the report, and it is an independent report, do make you sit back and think, actually, you know, there is some really good, valid information here. What's the best way to deliver education in rural areas, for instance, you know, up in the north of the island? Is it 3 or 4 smaller schools, or is it better to ensure every student has access to the best facilities, best educators, and opportunity to develop in a bigger social setting? You know, these were all things that needed to be considered. But some of our schools are very old and going to take a lot of maintenance. And, you know, I'm not talking super schools, but we do have some large schools, particularly in Ramsey. The school there, I think there's 500 students in it. It's looking at the island from an infrastructure point of view for education is what should be coming out of this report. And certainly the responses I've seen, it talks about that, but there's no action, and quite concerned that, again, we need more support, more help to actually come up with another. They're going to review what's in the report again. So actually, what's actually come out from the department now is really not worthy of anything. But let's look forward to July and let's debate it. It needs to be TIMWL decisions, not just departmental, and that's the challenge when you're in a department. But these are island decisions. This is island infrastructure, the education of our future, our young people, the future, and particularly all of those that are requiring additional educational needs in some form or other. There's been no funding, very, very little. I think Treasury have sort of tried to indicate, there's an extra £3 million gone in. that, it needs to be forthcoming. It's clear there's a funding deficit in education. I've always said it. I will always fight for it. The new minister thinks she's got an £18 million windfall. She hasn't. And I think this is going to be the interesting part now. Where's the money coming from? If we're going to fund it and not make the changes recommended in the report?
Because there's something in the region of £12 million identified for additional educational needs and children with complex needs. This is extra money that's required. Now, the savings that were identified in the report were something in the region of 7 million, around 3.5 million of which would have been through the closure of 8 schools. I mean, you're not a minister now, so you don't have to sort of answer in vague terms. Were you prepared to consider those closures? Would you have agreed, indeed, to some of those recommendations for closure?
I think any national politician should consider what's best for the island overall. It shouldn't be about your constituency area or anything like that. We should be considering the best opportunity for education, its facilities and funding for the island. And certainly that's tough decisions that need to be made. And some of those tough decisions could have been made. I would have made them if they were the right decisions, but there was much more discussion needed to take place with our schools, with our teachers. They're the professionals. They know what's required.
And indeed, one of the quite stark findings of the report was in relation to additional educational needs and children with complex needs. There seems to be an explosion in numbers of children in these categories. During your time, did the department have any understanding as to what was causing this?
Certainly, obviously. It's always been quite a large budget. Additional educational needs has always been a large budget. It's dispersed across the island in different centres at different schools. But the complex needs and the units that look after complex needs, people do get mixed up. Complex needs can be health issues as well as learning difficulties. And then we also have children with additional educational needs, which just might be the learning complexities. And currently we have these all mixed into single units. The report says that it might be more cost effective to build specialist units. Do we need an autism? We've got an autism strategy now that's come out from the Department of Health and Social Care. We're still working a little bit disjointed and a little bit in silos, would be my view around that. What we need to look is for additional educational needs and additional support for anybody with an additional learning need, and the best way to deliver that, most cost-effective, best way to deliver it, and to give those individuals, it should all be about the students, the best chance in life and the best opportunities to go on to whatever's their choice.
I will ask a final time, would you have cut or effectively closed one or two, maybe all of the schools that were identified, had you still been minister and been given a free hand?
I would, and I think they're the right decisions as a national politician, that you need to be making the tough. The Chief Minister keeps saying, I'm going to be fiscally responsible, I'm going to make tough decisions. Well, let's see where we get with this now on many areas. Where are these tough decisions going to be? Would I be recommending that possibility for efficiencies is losing teachers? No, I would not. That would be, totally wrong. What we should be looking at is across government where these skills and people's skill set can be best met, and don't lose any of our professionals in haste when there's lots of areas that there could be massive savings across government. Education doesn't feature in the Council of Ministers' updated island plan. Only in March this year, education didn't feature as the top 6 priority. Where does that? And that is one of the big challenges. I was not impressed with that at all, that did not come out of this Council of Ministers, that education was not one of the top 6. We're going to attract people to the island if we've got an excellent education system and facilities.
And what is quite shocking, and it's tucked away towards the back of the report, is the figures on spend per child. Now, Jersey and Guernsey are spending something over £10,000 per child. I think it's nearer £10,500 per child. The Isle of Man figures is about 5,500.
That's correct. And obviously that was quite alarming. That wasn't actually part of any original discussions with the organisation, but it was pushed for because I felt that Council of Ministers did need to understand the difference in the spend. But we also need to understand the differences in our education systems. Isle of Man's fully inclusive. That's why we've got an additional educational needs additional funding required, because we're doing a fully inclusive education system. Do I agree with that? Yes, I do, but you've got to fund it. No point shying away. If you've got a policy and it's the way you want to go, you've got to fund it. And
surely that makes it worse that additional educational needs in these other areas are funded separately. So specifically in the Isle of Man instance, we include additional educational needs. And we're still the bottom of all the UK countries and the Channel Islands. That's quite worrying as a figure.
It is, and it's certainly decreased since I was working within education. And obviously I would, having had that experience, put ideas forward as to where the funding could come from, where the additional funding could come from, without making significant changes in education. Clearly they might not have been liked. We've got massive funds for climate change. £40 million went into that. It's not getting utilised. We've heard today in the House that they're funding people to be employed for 2-year contracts out of a climate change fund. Utilise what funds are in that we have. Divide them up correctly. Climate change is a target for years and years away. Make sure that funding's allocated. And, it's a suggestion I made. Maybe that's why we have a new minister, that we should be taking funds from elsewhere and supporting education. It's key to the future of our island to make sure everybody's got that best opportunity for a good education and good skills to go forward.
So, in your estimation, then, this is the reason you were sacked?
There's many reasons. We're debating swimming pool. I don't actually really know, Phil, to be honest. I've done an amazing job, is the response I got from the Chief Minister on the day, but clearly he wasn't comfortable with some of the challenges that I was putting forward. But wouldn't any minister challenge for additional funds for an education department, all of our young people and the staff? I certainly would, and I will continue to do so.
Talking to Minister Caine, there's been a review into the financing of the schools on the Isle of Man, and most of the recommendations of that review your department has accepted, but you weren't keen to support the recommendation which would have reduced the number of schools, and instead of having what is described in the report as smaller, inefficient schools, you would have had larger, more efficient schools in terms of the financial delivery, at least, of the education to pupils.
Yeah, I think it was very welcome to have the review, and I think this is a great opportunity now for the department and for the island to look to the future structure and provision of education to serve our island for the next 10 years or more. But on that specific point regarding the 8 schools listed as the most inefficient, they're not inefficient. It's no big surprise to me that if you make schools bigger, put more pupils into a single space, and you have single form entry or 2 form entry, that you will reduce the cost compared with smaller rural schools serving their community. But we're not any town in the UK. We are the Isle of Man, and we have to develop a suitable education system to serve our island. So no, I could not support the closure, the merging or the rationalisation of smaller primary schools purely on the basis that they need to have 100 or more pupils. But absolutely, we can't say we mustn't take hard decisions, because we all are facing, we don't have the money magic tree, we don't have endless funding, however much we feel should be put into education in certain areas. So the department, my response to it is great report, great opportunity to look to the future of education, but smaller schools serving their community should not close purely because they are reduced numbers and then have all the disruption to a community of small children travelling long distances to attend school, and that has its own issues over climate, over the transport to get them there. But actually, while the provision and education outcomes remain strong in those schools, why would we change that? We can look at other things. We can look at the demographics. We can look at the development planned in an area and the ambitions of the island plan to increase the population. We can look at the condition of a building perhaps in the future. But when the education outcomes remain strong and the schools are serving their community, I think that would go against the grain of everything we're trying to achieve in the island plan by closing them. But we will take this as a great opportunity to put into place the response that the department has put down now on the Register of Business for debate in July, and I welcome my fellow Tynwald members' comments on it and the wider community.
Were we a town or a city even in the UK, we would be expecting at least £1,000 extra spent per pupil in regards to their education. Tucked away in the back of the report, there is an appendix which demonstrates that Jersey and Guernsey spend something in the region of £10,500 per pupil, and yet the Isle of Man is bottom of the list, £1,000 lower than Wales, which is the next lowest, in relation to how much we spend per pupil at just £5,500. Presumably, there is some interpretation required on those figures.
Absolutely. Although that does provide a clear view of the cost per pupil in those jurisdictions, it's important to understand what is being delivered in each jurisdiction and the context of each. I think the department is already talking to a couple of the other jurisdictions, try and investigate how that figure was arrived at and the context so that we can find out if it is a fair comparison. But irrespective of that, we want to have a properly funded education system on this island, and the report gives us a great opportunity to look at various aspects for improvement, and I will be welcoming input from our education professionals, from the schools and parents and students into where we go forward from here and how we deliver and ensure that we get not only the best educational outcomes, but an excellent education system that we can all be proud of, that is fit for the future generations.